Welcome to the Operate Podcast, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at company building from the perspective of the builders themselves. This is how we operate.
Welcome to the Operate Podcast. I'm Kerry Ransom, and I am back with my friend Ian Hathaway, who is a recent author of The Startup Community Way with Brad Feld. We had a great first episode that you can go listen to. This is part 2, and I'm excited to have him back. I think we could probably have part 3, 4, 5 and make this a regular thing. But Ian just has so many things going on between some of the institutes he's a part of, the Center for American Entrepreneurship. And so we've got a lot of things to cover, but we're going to jump in right now and talk about how do you rally support in a startup ecosystem, in a startup community. And in the book, they talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems and startup communities. We'll spend a little time even talking about the differences, you guys. But in either case, you need people in these various institutions and groups in the community to participate. So Ian, talk about how you guys think about really getting support and rallying support, and this concept of contagion, which often is viewed like COVID is as a contagion, but we want to think about it in a positive light in this case.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it takes those early adopters, really to get things moving, right? So it doesn't need to be a lot of people. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be in this formalized way. I've seen in some cities that they feel very early on that you need to brand the effort or create an organization, and you don't have to do that first. You want to build your minimum viable product, which is see who's interested in this, right? So, once, let's say you have 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 entrepreneurs around who want to try to kickstart something, get things going with an informal gathering, dinner, drinks, whatever floats your boat, breakfast. Mm-hmm. Harder now under this current environment to get things going that way, but there are these networks that exist, and it's just a matter of putting it together, talking about what your goals are, what you want to achieve, how to start bringing people in. It's sort of like therapy, right? I wouldn't get started if you're not committed to trying it for an extended period of time. It will take time. You brought up this notion about contagion, right? We talk about it in the book. For people who didn't maybe listen to the first episode, I'd go back and listen. But in complex adaptive systems, contagion is one of the key characteristics. You mentioned the spreading of a virus, right, which happens through a single mm-hmm. contact. We talk about social media content, which can go viral. It's sort of based on that. That's different. That's a simple contagion because mm-hmm. it just takes one point of contact for a full transmission. This, what I call complex contagion, it requires repeated mm-hmm. interactions. It requires, the adoption of norms by, some quantity of people, because it's a behavioral change, right? It's not, if you're doom scrolling through Twitter, on a daily basis, yes. that information is being transmitted to you. And we've seen the evidence. It's, Granovetter's famous paper from the 1973, about weak ties, the six degrees of separation, right? Mm-hmm. That's how information spreads, but behavior spreads in a clustered local dynamic through reinforced behavior. So that's how you got to do it. All right, we're going to do Tuesday morning open coffee club, or whatever the event is that you want to get it going, but just commit to doing it every week for a year, regardless of what happens. Actively try to recruit people in, using those weak ties you may have, trying to get people to bring their networks, and then just kind of go from there.
So as you think, I think that's a great, even baseline prescription. So let's play that out a little bit. So we start getting that group together as you think about the need for behavior change. What are, in your mind, what are some of the key goals that that early group should be setting?
Well, it's like one of those things. I mean, have you ever been to one of those events where there isn't an agenda and people are kind of looking around to the organizers for guidance on, well, we're looking to you? I mean, maybe that's okay in the first sense, but the whole point is that we want many leaders, right? It's not one or two people.
Yes.
So even if you're getting the thing going, the thing to stress is that what we're trying to do is to get emergent value connections occurring, right? Getting people talking, bringing more folks in, growing their networks, just getting to know what people are working on, what their challenges are. And then, letting what the priority areas might be bubble up. But the key for me is saying, look, we're not the kings of this. Let's say it's the handful of, women and men who started the thing. It's not about us. It's about all of us. And instilling that early on and putting people to work.
Yeah. And I mean, do you think in many cases putting people to work is based on identifying what those key needs are that others have? Is it putting to work in recruiting others?
Yes.
It's I think it's probably all of the above, right?
Yeah. Well,
and that's why it's complex, because it's not so linear and clear. And what I've found, I mean, I don't think I've talked about this on any of my prior episodes. When I first got here, there was a group, and it still exists today, and every month they would meet, and it was about startups and innovation. And every month they would poll the audience and say, how many of you are here for the first time? And every time, more than half of the people there were there for the first time. And what that showed me, after a while, I thought, wow, this is crazy. That means people are showing up hoping they're going to solve a problem tonight. And if they don't get that problem solved tonight, they're not coming back.
Yeah.
And they're not either feeling invited in, or that they don't have the right behavior of, maybe I can give to some of the other people here, and that would be my opportunity to come back. And I always felt like when we'd be in a small group in that, and people would go around the room, what are you looking for? Looking for a job. I'm looking for money. I'm looking for somebody for my team, what have you. And I always found at that point, I was trying to figure out how I could help these people. Like what can I give was why I showed up, but I didn't find a lot of other people trying to show up with. There were some others there, but not a lot. And so it's the behavior change, the flip of what you guys talk about this in the book. So what have others found in other communities that can help catalyze that?
Well, it's the same thing with, where we're talking about the organizers. Like if you're showing up and expecting that you're going to get something, spectacular out of one event, and if you don't, you're not going to return. Like that's just not how networks operate, right? You got to build relationships.
Yes.
And what I've found in my career, this isn't calculating. It's just my mode of operation. I think a lot of successful entrepreneurs operate this way. You're looking, I'm coming with something of value, right? I'm not looking to extract value in the beginning. What ends up happening is that you get more value that way because you're paid into this, right? People are vested in those relationships, and that's what they are. They're relationships, right? So I think it's the same thing with those actors. Don't expect to go into startup community participation as this is a one-time, two-time solution, right?
It's a lifestyle.
Yeah. Yes, and only do Carrie, look, we've made this connection. We've had a number of connection points over a short amount of time. We just met. I may have this amazing connection for you 6 months from now. But you're not asking for that today. It's just going to become clear to me. And we have built this social capital, which, we talk in the book about. We call it networks of trust. And that's when you extract value from those
Yes.
relationships is down the line once that trust has been established. And entrepreneurs have got to start thinking that way. I just said last night, speaking to a group in Iowa about this topic always comes up. Entrepreneurs are too busy to participate.
Yes, that
And
always comes up. That's right. Oh, I've been under a rock for 10 years building my company.
yeah, and that's just not true. You always have time. It's just a choice you're making. And I guess my prompt would be, it's not that you shouldn't be obsessing over your company and your product. It's that you're making large assumptions about the opportunity cost of going and engaging on a regular basis, right? I do think there is this cyclical dynamic, right? Some entrepreneurs will come in and out
Yes.
of the startup community at points in time. It's good to know that there will be people keeping it on the rails. That's why it's really good to have multiple leaders involved. But I just want to challenge the assumption that by not participating, right, that's a better outcome for their business, right?
That's right. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I had a scenario years ago where the entrepreneur and I was in, early in a company as almost a co-founder type, and the entrepreneur would sort of defer to me, like, well, you're the community guy. You do the community part. I'll do this part. And I'm always of the belief that you're going to build a better company by contributing whatever you can into. And part of that, I feel fortunate. I grew up in a family business where those investments into the community were already well established, generations before me. And so it just became sort of doctrine to me of like, that's part of what you do. And it's, you can look at it however you want. I'm of the belief you're going to help others. They're going to help you. It's sort of how the world order is. And I guess that gets to sort of the leadership side. As you think about leadership, are you seeing any trends at, let's say, generationally? Are you seeing an insurgence of youth, or are you seeing more energy around this from kind of mid-career, give back at the end of career? Where are you seeing any trends in the kind of leaders that really are committed to this?
Yeah. Well, look, I think there's, it's really dependent on each place, right? Culture is really
local.
Yeah, it's really place specific. I mean, look, you and I both grew up in the industrial and agricultural heartland, right? Yeah. It's not that people are programmed there to think about networks or increasing returns, right? I think for many of the people I went to high school with, right, I would say a third of my class was teed up to walk into the GM plan, and that was all set up, and there were no entrepreneurial ambitions because you didn't need to. You're going to get this safe job, $25 an hour, right? Full benefits, pension, early retirement. And so it actually will take generations for that to be bred out of the cultural fabric. And so that's a very different dynamic from the West Coast, right? And actually within the West Coast, we can talk about that.
Sure.
I do think there is a generational thing, which is, in particular, the younger people are growing up on the internet, right? I was born in 1980. I graduated from college in 2002. And the internet was not even really a thing we started using that much. I remember I got a cell phone, that's what we called it then, my senior year, right? Like I'm sort of like the beginning of the end of the pre-digital era, right? And so, at least for massive adoption. And so I think those people are used to they have a different mental model, right? I think they're more open, they're more collaborative. I don't think it's just the age thing. I do think there's something about growing up digitally for this group, and they're still young, and so and we'll see. I do think there's been a good shift in especially now in COVID, the fact that we're opening up our homes and our personal lives to people in such an intense way. I believe in leading through vulnerability. So for me, vulnerability means being honest, being transparent, expressing your self-doubts, your mistakes, right? Acknowledging the emotional side of being a human, rather than like these split personas. And I think that's a more accepted practice than it was probably, when my dad was my age. So we see those kinds of shifts. So I do think leadership is changing, because it has to. And I can still see some folks struggling with it now in this remote environment. I've been used to working remotely for years, but I can see that there's a lot of wasteful meeting time on Zoom, because people are trying to stay relevant, or managers they think that having that contact with their employees actually means that they're in control, when actually people probably want more autonomy.
Sure.
So anyway, we're going through a giant simulation right now, an experiment. I think on the other side of it, we will see different forms of leadership and organizational management.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in some respects you have like this digital age. We've seen some of this, but the military-industrial complex idea of, hey, like we have this brand that cascades from the top down. We have this structure that cascades from the top down. Now, you have however many people in your organization. I mean, I see it even in my own, where I'm encouraging the folks on my team, like, go out, be your authentic voice. Like, you're here because you believe in what we're building, and you're going to tell it in a slightly different way. But that, like, our brand is the team of people that we're we're bringing together, and the companies that we're working with. And I think a lot of brands and companies are still very restrictive about how much autonomy and voice they're giving to their people, right? So you look at that and you say, okay, could you envision a company of thousands of people where they're all sort of their own unique personal brands that roll up with some clear values that align? And I don't think we've seen a great sense of that yet, but maybe COVID is a driver for something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, look, on that military note, I have a fantastic book, since you and I both like books so much, that people should read. It's called Team of Teams, and it's written by General Stanley McChrystal.
Yeah, it's a great one.
I mentioned before that my book we talked about on episode 1 uses complex adaptive systems to explain startup communities and entrepreneurial ecosystems. I, unfortunately for me, came at it through the most dense teaching of that concept through the Santa Fe Institute, these scientists, when in fact, after I had gone through the pains of self-teaching that subject and applying it, I discovered there were multiple, not a ton, but there were at least multiple sources of people applying this thinking in the real world into managing systems, right? Managing organizations. And this to me is the best one, not only because of how crystallizing the concepts are and how well written it is, but also because they're talking about how the military, the ultimate hierarchy, the ultimate top-down controlled system, had to adapt in the face of a changing enemy, which was Al Qaeda in Iraq, right? They were a rapidly evolving, digitally focused, digitally organized, loose-knit organization, and the military had to adapt. And so if they can do it, they can adjust to this complex world and change their management structure and strategy, so can anyone else.
That's right. So let's talk about the recent news that's been floating around about this huge surge in new business applications during COVID. We both have a mutual friend in John Deary at the Center for American Entrepreneurship, doing great work to try to bring more attention to innovation, entrepreneurship, startups in DC, which is great. And there's, on one hand, hey, is there some good things happening? That's what's causing this big growth and jump in the last in the last few months in new business applications? Is this due to necessity of all the job loss that's happened during COVID? What is this even real information? Like, what's your view on what's going on?
Yeah, so let me give listeners a quick explanation of what's going on. So there's this data set at the Census Bureau, which tracks every business in the U.S. economy, right? It doesn't just track, new business filing numbers, right? EINs. It then ties that to the parent structure. Mm-hmm. So we can determine if the new cafe on your block is a Starbucks, which is the expansion of a very old and very large firm based in Seattle, or if it's a bona fide new, coffee shop, Ian's Coffee, right? This is important. This distinction is really important for a lot of reasons. This data, while super accurate and helpful for research, is problematic for policy making in the real world because it's so lagged. This database is lagged by a few years because there's a whole bunch of work that has to go on, and the Census Bureau is dramatically underfunded in this country. And so this new data set called the Business Formation Statistics came out, I guess, a couple years ago. And in the COVID crisis, they're now releasing these statistics on a weekly basis. It was on a quarterly basis. But basically, they took this historical relationship between real-time business filings at the IRS, and then this really robust data set, an accurate data set that was lagged, and try to make predictions about this for each business filing. Is this going to be a real business? And what we mean by that is it going to employ people? Or is this just a sole proprietor or a fund, right? Every time you raise a fund, that's a new business entity or any other structure. And so they feel like they've got this formula down, right? And so now with COVID, they've been releasing these statistics every week. And so they're basically able to say, this is the pace of new businesses on a weekly basis in near real time that are, these are highly likely to be real businesses. And it's, as you mentioned, it's off the charts, right? This got covered in Wall Street Journal article. I was quoted in, I gave some interviews, and it was really interesting to me. I had no idea people would be so interested in this. And it's really not something that I track that closely anymore, but I happen to still know a lot about it. So I think a couple of things are going on here. First of all, although we've seen this surge in new business filings, it's really important to remember that preceding this and actually ongoing is that we've had many business failures, right? So this may not, well, it's very likely to not be purely about new opportunities, right? It's about necessity, right? We've had a lot of pain and people are creating, work for themselves. Secondly, on the negative side, we just had some recent releases around industry. What we get for timeliness, we have to lose granularity, but now we're learning a little bit about what these businesses are. And by far, most of them are in, I forget what they're calling it, but non-physical retail. So people doing retail, maybe even online, Etsy, whatever. But they're in this formula, this is important. Those are very likely to not be real businesses and employ people. But in this benchmarking exercise where they benchmark the real-time data to that historical data to flag whether they think it will be a real employer business, they flag all retail establishments as likely to be. Yeah, because that was the historical relationship, and that's not the case now. So I think a lot of it is not, the type of entrepreneurship we think about. That being said, however, we know that entrepreneurs respond to opportunity, and we've had a massive shift, some of it cyclical, but some of it permanent in our society and our economy, the structure of both of those things. And so, of course, there are new opportunities for entrepreneurs to respond to, and I'm sure they are. I don't know, I'm sure every pitch meeting you're in or every mentor engagement, right, they're entrepreneurs, the first thing that's coming up is, here's what our business looks like during and after COVID. And so it's just a part of the dynamic. I think it's a fairly nuanced story. It's not all good. In fact, I would say it's mostly not good. And just remember, stimulus is running out, and I think, the rest of this year is going to look a lot different than it has so far.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think most people that have those traditional kind of service, retail, hourly types of jobs and if they're open right now, most of those folks are still looking for people. I mean, you see help wanted signs most places. So we have this big mismatch that's happening right now. So even for new businesses, they seem to somewhat be struggling to hire, except for the super high echelon, big tech or other big companies that have this sense. I think they're capitalizing on their perceived sense of stability right now in an otherwise unstable, chaotic world. So yeah, I appreciate you weighing in, giving some sense there. What do you think about entrepreneurship and startups right now and over the next couple of years, where what does, and you even think about like regional strategies, and you go, okay, we want to try to attract more capital, attract more entrepreneurs to this area. Well, the job creator, the entrepreneur might move to that place, but they may be the only one there. All the other people that they have as a part of their business could be all kinds of other places. And so as you think about that and economic development, how do you think about the entrepreneur, him or herself, the capital, the other services and needs, and kind of the multiplier effects of it in a world where you could have a completely virtual company, virtual team?
Yeah. So a bunch of different thoughts on that.
Yeah.
So first of all, this is an opportunity for, if we're going to sort of think about the type of entrepreneurs that you and I work with, mostly, high tech, venture backable companies. We've seen now a huge opportunity for that to diffuse geographically. I'm convinced that we'll see a permanent shift to a degree outside of Silicon Valley, right? To other locations. Okay.
All good.
Yeah. So I think we've seen a permanent shift out of the Valley to a degree. What degree, I don't know, or other high cost markets like New York. I do think it's been somewhat overstated so far what the longer term effects of that will be. I think second tier cities, and I'll say that in a generous way or not generous way, depending on your perspective, but just under the cut. So Austin, Raleigh, Durham, those kind of places, San Diego, I feel like those are going to be huge beneficiaries.
Because they have just enough, right? Like they have enough.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not my hometown where, you don't know if there's another computer programmer within 30 miles.
Absolutely. So I think that's the more likely destination. We do have good data on migration of entrepreneurs and talent and personal connections and quality of life are really important. But above that is work opportunity. So it's in that order: work, and then the personal connections, quality of life.
Do you think that's flipped it? Well, has flipped it all for sort of the kinds of entrepreneurs that we think about, where they're saying, I can do this anywhere now. Let me be more intentional about where I do it.
I do, especially those people who have the luxury of those strong networks in the hubs, right? So if you have a really strong network in Silicon Valley and you want to live somewhere else and you can get on a plane and, maintain those relationships, I think those are great people to have relocating to your city, right? This thing we've observed in the data over the years recently, in recent years, these on a per capita basis, these little pockets of venture-backed activity in what's the Oh, Park City, Utah. You see
Yeah,
that.
Silicon Slopes. Yes.
Yeah, you see it there. You see that in the data. You see it in Breckenridge in Colorado.
Mhm.
These little mountain towns, Telluride, on a per capita basis, obviously.
Mhm.
So this experiment has already been going on. I expect that will proliferate. So it's a really good opportunity for this to happen in more places. You mentioned what's the economic impact of that? Well, uh, it's useful, and you brought up the multiplier. So there's a great book that everyone should read. I think it's the most important economics book written in the last decade. Maybe it was published in 2013. It's called The New Geography of Jobs by Enrico Moretti.
Mhm.
He's the chair of the economics department at UC Berkeley. And he says, look, there's two segments of the economy, the tradable sector and the non-tradable sector. The tradable sector makes goods and services that can be bought and sold anywhere around the country, around the world. That segment of the economy is really good for driving productivity because it's facing international competition, and it brings revenue into your region that can then be distributed through the non-tradable sector, which produces goods and services that must be bought and sold locally. Not just lower skill, lower paying like taxi drivers and cooks, but also doctors and lawyers and that sort of thing. So you want a robust tradable sector to draw in income to the region that then feeds the local services economy. Even better if you have a strong segment of that tradable sector in what Moretti is calling the innovation. Sector. Yeah, not just how you and I think of software, hardware, computer services, but more broadly,
I think of it as kind of IP based.
Yep.
Right, where you can explosively compete, right? Even a medical device that has a lot of IP. So
Yep, agreed. So agree with all that. And so these businesses have strong multiplier effects, i.e. the spillover benefits to the local services economy are particularly large, meaning it's much better to be a barista, in Silicon Valley than in the middle of an industrial wasteland. Obviously, we've seen maybe that went a little too far, urban agglomeration run amok. But the point being, there's more job security and higher wages for everyone if you're located in a city that has a healthy amount of that activity going on. Not just because the workers are paid higher wages, but also because those activities tend to cluster, right? Technical activities tend to have specialized service providers and specialized inputs. And that's sort of a positive reinforcing feedback loop that was the reason why, in spite of it being so crowded and so expensive, this urban agglomeration was happening. Now, that was predicated on the fact that we had to be in a physical co-location. Now we've gone through this huge experiment that's proving, to a degree, I think it varies on the person, on the team, on the type of work you're doing, whether or not that can be done on a permanent basis. And so that second aspect of it, the clustering agglomeration, will that, if you have the CEO of a company, of one of these high tech companies in your community, but you don't have the other workers, you got the first effect, but you may not have that second.
Yeah. And that's what's going to be interesting to see. And as I was saying earlier, I feel like where I am here, a couple things that I've studied, observed at least. One is we have a lot of people who work for innovative companies here, but the headquarters isn't here. So I think we're getting sort of a nice wage, but not really the multiplier effect. And then the other we have is the non-tradable, as I would call it, that are exporting their capital to other places. They've created, and this could be the doctors, lawyers, this could be the real estate folks that are exporting their capital to other places because they're moving to real estate in other markets and they're kind of asset managing, or they're contributing to venture in a fund in another location like Silicon Valley or New York, let's say, as an example. And those I would say actually have and from my observation are having negative economic effects, versus saying we could allocate capital to the innovation economy locally, and that could be our way of actually moving from maybe the non-tradable to the tradable. Because, you know, if I'm somebody who does hourly work, or you've seen people that are doing, you know, they do hourly work, but they do it for companies in other places versus locally. So how do you think about sort of, you know, microeconomic flows? Because I think that's something that's not well understood by people in the financial and capital allocation decisions they're making.
Well, it makes sense to me why people want to live there, even if their company's not there, because the quality of life is so high. The challenge, of course, you know, is that generally speaking, companies that grow up in a place where their headquarters is are more vested in those communities.
That's right.
And so are the executives, right? Which also, you know, is another factor to consider in this whole virtual environment into perpetuity, which is, okay, fine, Facebook says and Twitter say, okay, you can work anywhere, but is that really true? Can you advance your career into management and executive roles? I don't know. If the answer is no, then it undermines the whole thing.
That's right. Yeah, if you end up in a hybrid situation where you have sort of the have and have nots or something, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as you said, I mean, you know, that headquarters thing can be a big deal, because those are not always, but they have the potential to be corporate stewards, right, of a community. The corporate philanthropists who can actually have a really big impact with the right leadership. It can just take one or two of those to really drive meaningful change. And so I feel like what you're describing a little bit is a lot of well-paid, well-resourced, income earners and investors who are just there for the quality of life, but aren't really building anything for the community, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and they're just, when they're in as an investor here, then they're just looking for maximum return, single value, not, and you know, and I think part of like the goal, obviously, of a startup community is to create an exciting, inspiring participation for those that can see, hey, this can create abundance for everybody. It's not zero sum. It's you know, a better quality of life for everybody is actually a better quality of life for you too.
Yeah, and that's look, that's a lesson that I think this country is struggling to face.
Yes, for sure.
You know, I still remember being in Brazil and Rio de Janeiro. Brazil traditionally has some of the highest income inequality in the world. Wealth inequality even more.
Yes.
The United States has either surpassed, I think it's eclipsed it actually.
Wow.
It's pretty bad here. I remember spending time in Rio, and this, I don't know, I guess I was last there in maybe 15 years ago. Wow, it's hard.
It's about when I was there. Yeah. Yes.
But Rio is this beautiful city. I spent time in an area near Ipanema Beach. It's one of the wealthiest, I think it's actually the wealthiest neighborhood. Lots of mansion-like homes behind walls and gates. And up the hill is one of these favelas, right?
Yeah. Which from a distance looks beautiful.
Yes.
Until you go in one. Yes.
Absolutely. And it's right next to this. And I was thinking, boy, these wealthy families, I mean, I'm sure it's like a complicated relationship with the government, right? Maybe the government is failing, right, in so many ways. But if there wasn't so much income inequality, maybe they wouldn't have to have private guards with machine guns taking their children to school. maybe they wouldn't have to live behind these walls in fear of kidnappings, which is rampant.
Mm-hmm.
And that just feels like not worth it to me.
That's right.
You want people to do better around you. I believe it improves the quality of life for you. So to your point, that's a very long-winded way of saying absolutely. And if this country, people don't think that we're approaching that, they're wrong. The data is a different story.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that's a topic for the following, I think, couple decades at least, to see where we as a country decide to go. And hopefully people like you, and I will support you in whatever way I can, can help illuminate more both data and even heart. Like I think we all can do our part to help with that. So Ian, I got it.
Let me add one more thing, because I think this is kind of useful.
Yes.
For those people in your community who might be interested in investing in entrepreneurship as a means of making their cities more vibrant, their regions more vibrant, Brad has this great thing where he calls it, Brad Feld, my co-author, he says, think of investing in startups or angel investing as a form of for-profit philanthropy.
That is so powerful. Yes.
Right. It's like you're very accustomed to putting your name on a hospital wing or on a placard at the local zoo, or whatever it is, at the opera house, the ballet, whatever it is that you're these causes, like these civic causes that people donate to. But the startups that you invest in, most of them will fail, and that is treated like a philanthropic donation for purposes. But two things might happen. First of all, you might make some real money from the ones that succeed, right?
Yep.
And if you do, those companies are going to create many jobs in that community, and they will stay. And those people will create more jobs, and you'll have a more prosperous community, and one that people are more vested in.
Yes.
And so that would be my argument: is try for-profit philanthropy by investing in startup companies.
I think that's great. Well, I think that's a great way to sort of put a pin in this part of this discussion, and probably to be continued again. So last thing, what has you most optimistic about the future of innovation?
Well, first of all, I mean, we have just gone through, like I said, this massive dislocation in society, in the structure of our economy. A couple of things have happened, right? Well, more than a couple, but first, we have new problems to solve, right? Like we've discussed, entrepreneurs see those opportunities. Second, I think a lot of neglected problems have, fully revealed themselves, right? Things we haven't been paying attention to are super clear. Not that this is COVID related, but you and I both live in California, and the wildfires this year were 4 times the record, which was set in 2018. We've got a real problem with climate change, and it's undeniable here. So I feel like, I hope that the stressors in this world are forcing people to focus on these things.
Yes.
And the third is that, I don't know, this has been a very difficult time in life. And I feel like so many people are questioning deeply what they're doing with their lives, not just in the usual way, sort of, oh, I'm in a corporation and it's a soulless corporation. I'm exchanging a paycheck for, whatever. I feel like I'm not contributing to the world, but I think people are really feeling it now. And so for those reasons, I'm super optimistic about the future of innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm super optimistic about the growth and proliferation of startup communities. For the reasons we discussed, this is an opportunity for new cities to welcome in entrepreneurs with deep networks and wealth that they've created in other communities. And that's a chance for them to become embedded in those communities and be the future leaders, civic leaders in those communities, seeding entrepreneurship for generations to come. And I also think we're just going to have a lot more gratitude around community in general. can't wait to spend time with people. I'm an introvert, actually, and so I love the one-to-ones and small groups. Events can kind of overwhelm me, but I'll tell you what, I'll have a lot more appreciation for that now. And so I think for all those reasons, startups and startup communities have a bright future on the other side of this, whenever that may be.
Amazing. Well, Ian, so good to see you. Thank you again for joining me and sharing your thoughts and wisdom with my audience and with me. And I have greatly enjoyed the friendship that we have built in recent weeks and months, and more to come. So
Me too.
good to see you, and we will talk soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Operate Podcast. If you like this conversation, as a favor to me, you can rate us, review us, or subscribe, or tell your friends. You can also reach out to us on Twitter at Operate Podcast. Until next week, get out there and operate.